The coastal North Carolina heat pressed down on a Marine Corps shooting range like a wet blanket, thick with humidity that made every breath feel heavy. Lance Corporal Rosalind Kensington adjusted the straps of her pack as she stepped off the transport vehicle, her boots crunching against the gravel pathway that led toward the long-range rifle qualification course. Pine trees bordered the facility on 3 sides, their shadows offering little relief from the August sun that blazed overhead. She had arrived exactly 15 minutes early, just as she always did. The range stretched before her in carefully measured increments. Target stations positioned at distances that would challenge even experienced marksmen. 200 yards, 400, 600, and beyond that, the long-range positions that separated the exceptional from the merely competent. Staff Sergeant Brock Torrance stood near the equipment shed, his broad frame casting a long shadow across the wooden deck where rifles were staged for the day's training. He noticed her approach, and his expression shifted immediately, his jaw tightening as he turned to address the other Marines gathered around him. "You have got to be kidding me," Torrance said, his voice carrying easily across the range. His words were meant to be heard. "They sent us an admin clerk." Several of the Marines chuckled, glancing in her direction. Corporal Wade Hutchins, a lean man with close-cropped blonde hair, grinned widely as he elbowed the Marine beside him. "Maybe she thinks we need someone to file paperwork on our targets," he said. Rosalind kept her expression neutral as she continued walking toward the equipment area. She had heard variations of this reception before, at her previous duty station and during initial training. The comments followed a predictable pattern, as reliable as the manual of arms. Before we continue with this story, drop a comment and let us know what state you are watching from. Maybe you have served or know someone who broke barriers in the military. It is always powerful to hear where courage shows up across this country. Torrance crossed his arms as she approached, positioning himself directly in her path. His name tape read clearly across his chest, above 3 rows of ribbons that marked years of service. "Lance Corporal Kensington," he said, dragging out her rank with obvious skepticism. "Do you even know which end the bullet comes out of?" "Yes, Staff Sergeant," she replied evenly. Her voice remained steady, professional. He studied her for a long moment, his eyes narrowing. "I do not know what strings you pulled to get assigned to this unit, but let me be crystal clear. This is not some diversity checkbox exercise. This is real combat training. Marines die when snipers miss. You understand that?" "Yes, Staff Sergeant." Hutchins stepped forward, holding a rifle that had seen better days. The stock was scratched, the scope mount slightly loose. "Here you go, Kensington," he said with exaggerated courtesy. "We saved the best equipment just for you." He handed her the weapon with a smirk that suggested he thought himself quite clever. She accepted the rifle without comment, her fingers automatically checking the chamber and inspecting the condition of the weapon. The action was stiff, the trigger pull would be inconsistent, and the scope had a hairline crack in the housing. It was exactly what she expected. "You will be on Station 12, Torrance informed her, gesturing toward the far end of the range. "That is the position with the worst sight lines and the most wind interference. But I'm sure you will do just fine." His tone made it clear he expected the opposite. The other Marines had begun collecting their assigned weapons, their conversation returning to technical discussions about ballistics and wind calculations. None of them looked in her direction. She was already invisible to them, dismissed before she had fired a single round. Rosalind walked toward Station 12, feeling the weight of their assumptions following her like a physical presence. The morning sun climbed higher, promising a long, uncomfortable day ahead. She set her pack down carefully and began the methodical process of preparing her position, her movements precise and practiced in ways that none of them were watching closely enough to notice. The first training session began with Torrance's voice booming across the range, calling the Marines to attention. Rosalind stood at Station 12, her rifle positioned on the sandbag rest, her body settling into the familiar stance that she had practiced thousands of times before. But here, in this moment, she forced herself to perform as they expected. Competent, but unremarkable. Good enough to pass, but not enough to draw attention. 200-yard targets, Torrance commanded. 5 rounds, standard grouping exercise. Hutchins, you're up first. The corporal took his position with theatrical confidence, making a show of his preparation. He fired 5 shots in quick succession, then stood to examine his target through binoculars. For hits in the outer rings, 1 complete miss. Torrance nodded approvingly despite the mediocre performance. Solid work, Hutchins, the staff sergeant said. That is how you maintain consistent fire under pressure. Rosalind watched without expression. 4 out of 5 at 200 yards was barely passing. Any competitive shooter would be embarrassed by that grouping. But she remained silent, her hands resting lightly on her rifle as other Marines took their turns. When her rotation arrived, she aimed carefully, controlled her breathing exactly as expected, and fired 5 rounds that clustered in the center mass area. Not perfect, not impressive, just adequate. 3 hits in the inner rings, 2 in the middle zones. Passing but forgettable. Torrance walked behind her position, his boots crunching deliberately in the gravel. Well, he said loudly enough for everyone to hear, I suppose that is acceptable for someone who is probably more comfortable with a keyboard than a rifle. Maybe you can type up a report about how you almost hit the target. The other Marines laughed on cue. Rosalind cleared her weapon and stepped back from the line, her face revealing nothing. Inside, she calculated the wind speed, the temperature differential, the exact adjustments that would have put all 5 rounds through the same hole. But she kept that knowledge locked away, hidden behind a mask of modest competence. The morning progressed with increasing heat and escalating commentary. Torrance seemed to have made it his personal mission to provide running criticism of her every movement. Her stance was too rigid. Her breathing was too controlled. Her trigger pull was too hesitant. Nothing she did was correct in his assessment, even when her performance matched or exceeded that of the other trainees. During the midday break, the Marines gathered in the shade of the equipment shed. Hutchins held court, entertaining the group with exaggerated stories about his previous deployments. Private First Class Desmond Okonkwo sat slightly apart from the main group, eating his meal in quiet observation. He was the only one who had not participated in the mockery, though he had not defended her either. Rosalind sat alone at the far end of the deck, methodically cleaning her assigned rifle despite its poor condition. She worked with careful attention, removing the carbon buildup, checking the action, doing everything possible to improve the weapon's reliability. It was a losing battle with this particular rifle, but the ritual was comforting, familiar. Okonkwo approached slowly, his movements careful and non-threatening. He sat down several feet away, not speaking immediately. After a long moment, he gestured toward her rifle. That weapon is garbage, he said quietly. I have seen better equipment in reserve storage. It functions, she replied, not looking up from her work. Barely, he said. He paused, then added, you shoot better than you're showing. She stopped her cleaning motion, meeting his eyes for the first time. It was not a question, but a statement. He had been paying attention when the others had not. Before she could respond, Torrance's voice cut across the range. Break is over. Back to your stations. We have got a long afternoon ahead, and some of you need all the practice you can get. His eyes landed meaningfully on Rosalind. The afternoon session focused on longer distances and more challenging conditions. The wind had picked up, creating variables that required constant adjustment. Torrance announced that the upcoming qualification exercise would determine who advanced to the specialized sniper program and who returned to regular infantry units. The stakes were explicit, the pressure intentional. This is not a participation trophy course, Torrance declared, pacing behind the firing line. The Marine Corps needs snipers who can perform under combat conditions, not desk jockeys playing soldier. Some of you will succeed. Others will fail and return to where you belong. His gaze lingered on Rosalind, making his meaning unmistakable. As the day ended and the Marines secured their equipment, Hutchins organized an informal gathering to discuss preparation strategies. Everyone was invited except Rosalind, who packed her gear in deliberate isolation. She could hear their conversation, their shared tips and encouragement, the camaraderie that excluded her completely. Walking back to the barracks alone, she thought about her father, about her grandfather, about the legacy they had built in the Marine Corps. They had faced their own battles, different but equally real. Her grandfather's photograph sat in her footlocker, a black and white image of him in dress blues, his expert marksmanship badges prominent on his chest. He had taught her to shoot before she could ride a bicycle, training her with patience and precision. She had promised herself she would honor that legacy, but on her own terms. Not by announcing her credentials or demanding recognition, but by letting her performance speak when it mattered most. The qualification exercise was coming. That would be the moment of truth. For now, she would endure the mockery, accept the poor equipment, and wait for the opportunity to show them exactly what they had failed to see. The week leading to qualification day transformed the training range into a crucible of pressure and competition. Each morning began before dawn, the Marines arriving in darkness to maximize their preparation time. Torrance drove them relentlessly, but his attention seemed particularly focused on making Rosalind's experience as difficult as possible. On Tuesday morning, he announced a new requirement specifically for her. Kensington, since you need extra practice, you will complete double the number of drills as everyone else. Consider it an opportunity to catch up to the standards we expect here. The other Marines exchanged glances but said nothing. Hutchins smirked as he settled into his position, knowing his own workload had just been cut in half while hers doubled. Rosalind simply nodded and began the extended routine, her movements efficient and uncomplaining. While other trainees received coaching on their technique, suggestions for improvement, and encouragement after good shots, Rosalind worked in isolation. When Hutchins struggled with windage calculations, Torrance spent 15 minutes walking him through the math, demonstrating the formulas with patient detail. When Rosalind completed her calculations correctly and hit her targets, Torrance walked past without comment. The inequality was systematic and obvious. Equipment malfunctions that would have earned other Marines immediate replacements were dismissed when Rosalind reported them. Her requests for basic supplies were delayed or forgotten. Even her target assignments were modified to increase difficulty, placing her objectives in areas with maximum environmental interference. By Wednesday afternoon, the physical toll was visible on all the Marines. The heat, the repetition, the mental strain of precision shooting had worn down even the most confident among them. Private Chun developed a tremor in his shooting hand. Corporal Matthews complained constantly about the sun's glare affecting his sight picture. Several Marines visited the medical station for dehydration or heat exhaustion. Rosalind showed no outward signs of strain. Her uniform remained crisp, her movements steady, her face composed. This apparent imperviousness only seemed to irritate Torrance further. "How about some realistic pressure, Kensington?" he announced during Thursday's session. "Let us see how you perform when people are watching." Everyone, take a break and observe Lance Corporal Kensington attempt the 600-yard qualification targets. The Marines gathered behind her position, creating an audience of skeptical observers. Hutchins made a show of checking his watch, as if timing her inevitable failure. The pressure was intentional, designed to expose weakness. She settled into position, feeling their eyes on her back, hearing their whispered predictions of her performance. The rifle felt familiar in her hands despite its flaws. She had spent hours learning its particular quirks, compensating for its inconsistencies, making it work despite its condition. The first shot broke cleanly, center mass. The second followed, slightly right, but still solidly in the target zone. Third, fourth, fifth, all acceptable hits that would count toward qualification standards. Not spectacular, but passing. Torrance's expression showed disappointment that she had not failed completely. "Adequate," he said dismissively. "Now let us see real shooting. Hutchins, show her how it is done." The corporal stepped forward with confidence, taking the position she had just vacated. He fired 5 rounds with theatrical flair, standing dramatically to check his results. 2 hits, 3 misses. His face flushed as he realized his performance had been worse than hers. The wind shifted, Hutchins said quickly. Conditions changed between her shots and mine. Of course, Torrance agreed smoothly, though everyone present knew the wind had been constant. These environmental factors require experience to handle properly. Okonkwo caught Rosalind's eye briefly, a flicker of understanding passing between them. He had seen what actually happened, the contrast between performance and reception. But he remained silent, knowing that speaking up would only create more problems. Friday brought the final intensive preparation session. Torrance gathered the Marines for a briefing about the qualification exercise, his tone serious and professional. "Tomorrow will separate those who belong here from those who do not," he said. "Command staff will be observing. Your performance will determine your future in this program and possibly your entire military career." He outlined the structure of the test. Multiple distances, various positions, timed sequences, moving targets. Each element designed to evaluate different skills under increasing stress. The passing standard was 70% accuracy across all stages. Anything less meant immediate removal from the program. "Kensington," Torrance added, "since you have had such extensive extra practice this week, I expect you will either finally demonstrate competence or confirm that you do not belong here. Either outcome will be enlightening." That evening, the Marines conducted final equipment checks and mental preparation. Hutchins organized a study session in the barracks, reviewing wind formulas and range estimation techniques. The gathering had the atmosphere of soldiers before battle, supporting each other through shared anxiety. Rosalind sat alone in her rack, cleaning her rifle one final time. The weapon was as ready as it would ever be given its limitations. She thought about the photograph in her footlocker, about the legacy she carried, about the moment that was coming. Her grandfather had once told her that true skill revealed itself not in easy conditions, but when everything worked against you. Tomorrow, she would honor that lesson. Tomorrow, when the pressure reached its peak and the stakes were highest, she would finally show them what they had failed to recognize. Not for validation or approval, but because excellence demanded expression, and she had spent a lifetime preparing for moments exactly like this. The range would tell the truth. The targets would not lie. And everyone who had underestimated her would finally understand their mistake. Qualification day arrived with an overcast sky that promised complications. Dark clouds gathered on the horizon, bringing unpredictable wind patterns that would challenge even experienced shooters. The Marines assembled at the range before sunrise, their faces showing varying degrees of confidence and anxiety. 3 vehicles pulled into the parking area just as morning light began filtering through the clouds. Command staff emerged, officers whose presence immediately elevated the atmosphere from training exercise to career-defining evaluation. Major Castellanos, the battalion executive officer, stepped out first, his uniform immaculate despite the early hour. 2 captains followed, clipboards in hand, prepared to document every detail of the day's performance. Torrance straightened noticeably, his usual swagger replaced with military formality. He saluted sharply as the major approached, his voice crisp and professional. "Sir, the unit is prepared to commence qualification exercises. All personnel are present and equipment is staged." "Very good, Staff Sergeant," Major Castellanos replied, his eyes scanning the assembled Marines. "I understand this cycle has shown promising development. We are eager to see the results of your training program." The staff sergeant's chest swelled slightly at the praise. "Yes, sir, we have some exceptional shooters in this group. I am confident you will be impressed with their performance." Another vehicle arrived, this one carrying Gunnery Sergeant Elena Vieira, the range master whose reputation preceded her. She had served 3 combat deployments as a sniper, earned numerous commendations, and was known throughout the Marine Corps for her ability to identify genuine talent. Her presence meant this qualification would be evaluated by someone who actually understood the craft at its highest level. Vieira stepped out of her vehicle with economical grace, her movements betraying years of discipline and experience. She carried a weathered notebook and a rangefinder that showed signs of extensive field use. Her eyes swept across the Marines with professional assessment, lingering momentarily on each face, reading their confidence or lack thereof. Gunnery Sergeant Vieira will be overseeing today's qualification, Major Castellanos announced. Her evaluation will carry significant weight in determining program advancement. I expect everyone to perform to the absolute best of their abilities. Torrance's expression flickered briefly with something that might have been concern. Vieira's reputation included an intolerance for politics and favoritism. She evaluated performance, nothing else. Her presence meant the qualification would be legitimate, fair, and brutally honest. The course layout was more complex than anything they had trained on during the week. Target stations were positioned at 200, 400, 600, 800, and 1,000 yards. Each distance required different positions, from prone to kneeling to standing. Time sequences would test speed and accuracy simultaneously. Moving targets would evaluate tracking ability and lead calculations. Weather conditions deteriorated as the briefing concluded. Wind speeds increased, gusting unpredictably from multiple directions. The temperature dropped as clouds thickened overhead, creating challenging light conditions that would make sight pictures difficult to maintain. Every environmental factor conspired to make the exercise as demanding as possible. "This is real-world shooting," Vieira announced, her voice carrying authority earned through experience rather than rank. "Combat does not wait for perfect conditions. Your performance today will reflect your actual capability under stress. There are no excuses, no second chances. You either meet the standard or you do not." The Marines would shoot in order of seniority, which meant Hutchins would go first and Rosalind would shoot last. The corporal approached his position with visible confidence, though his hands betrayed slight nervousness as he loaded his rifle. The command staff positioned themselves behind the firing line with clear sight lines to observe every shot. Hutchins fired his first sequence at 200 yards. 5 rounds, 3 hits, 2 misses. Respectable, but not exceptional. His second sequence at 400 yards produced similar results, his grouping loose and inconsistent. By the time he reached 600 yards, his performance had declined noticeably. 2 hits out of 5, both barely inside the acceptable zone. Vieira made notes without expression. Major Castellanos frowned slightly. Torrance's jaw tightened, though he maintained his professional demeanor. This was not the impressive performance he had promised. Private Chin shot next, his tremor from earlier in the week returning under pressure. His scores were barely passing, saved only by occasional lucky hits that compensated for obvious misses. Corporal Matthews followed with marginally better results, but still far below the exceptional standards expected from sniper candidates. One Marine after another stepped to the line, and one after another failed to meet the elevated expectations. The wind proved treacherous, the lighting conditions difficult, the pressure overwhelming. Marines who had seemed confident during training now struggled with basic fundamentals. Equipment functioned perfectly. Conditions were challenging, but not impossible. Yet performance across the board was disappointingly mediocre. Torrance's face grew darker with each subpar performance. His best shooters, the Marines he had praised and promoted throughout the week, were failing to demonstrate the excellence he had guaranteed to command staff. Hutchins watched with growing anxiety as his peers continued to underperform, realizing that his own mediocre scores now looked even worse by comparison. Major Castellanos conferred quietly with the captains, their expressions showing clear concern. Vieira continued taking notes, her face remaining neutral, but her pen moving constantly, documenting every detail of the disappointing qualification exercise. The morning progressed with mounting tension and declining scores. What should have been a showcase of training program success had become a demonstration of widespread inadequacy. And through it all, Rosalind waited at Station 12, watching everything with calm attention, her turn approaching as the disaster unfolded around her. Private Okonkwo stepped to the firing line as the 10th shooter of the morning, his face composed despite the pressure mounting around him. He had watched 9 Marines struggle, had seen scores that barely reached passing levels, and understood that expectations had been dramatically lowered by the collective poor performance. He settled into position with careful deliberation, his movements reflecting genuine training rather than false confidence. The wind gusted as he prepared his first shot, and he waited patiently for a lull before squeezing the trigger. His first round at 200 yards struck center mass. The second followed cleanly. By his fifth shot, he had achieved a tight grouping that earned an approving nod for Vieira. "Decent fundamentals," she said quietly, marking her notebook. "He understands patience." Okonkwo continued through the qualification stages with consistent competence. Not spectacular, not exceptional, but solid and reliable. 400 yards produced similar results. 600 yards challenged him more significantly, but he adapted his technique and maintained acceptable accuracy. When he completed his final sequence, his overall score stood at 78%, comfortably above the minimum standard. It was the best performance of the day so far, and the contrast with the other Marines was striking. Torrance offered grudging acknowledgement. "Acceptable work, Private. You have demonstrated adequate proficiency." "Thank you, Staff Sergeant," Okonkwo replied, securing his weapon and stepping back from the line. As he passed Rosalind's position, he met her eyes briefly. A silent message passed between them, something between encouragement and curiosity about what she would reveal when her turn finally arrived. 3 more Marines shot after Okonkwo, and all 3 failed to match even his modest success. Corporal Brennan, who had been particularly vocal about his shooting abilities during training, barely reached 65% accuracy. His final long-range sequence collapsed completely under pressure, his hands shaking visibly as he attempted to steady his rifle. Major Castellanos spoke quietly with Torrance during a brief pause between shooters. The staff sergeant's responses were increasingly defensive, his posture rigid with barely contained frustration. The promised excellence had failed to materialize, and command staff's patience was visibly thinning. Vieira walked the length of the firing line, examining target results and comparing her observations with the documented scores. She paused at each station, studying the groupings, analyzing the patterns of hits and misses. Her expertise allowed her to read stories in the target paper that others might miss. Rush shots revealed themselves in vertical stringing. Flinching created predictable patterns. Proper technique left signatures of control precision. When she reached Station 12, where Rosalind's equipment sat waiting, Vieira spent extra time examining the rifle. She worked the action, tested the trigger pull, inspected the scope mounting. Her expression remained neutral, but something in her attention suggested professional interest rather than casual observation. 2 more Marines completed their qualifications with unremarkable results. The scores clustered in a narrow band of mediocrity, with Okonkwo's performance remaining the singular exception to widespread disappointment. Hutchins stood with his arms crossed, his earlier swagger completely deflated by the reality of his own inadequate performance and the collective failure of his peers. The clouds had thickened further as midday approached, creating a flat gray light that eliminated shadows and made depth perception more difficult. Wind continued gusting in irregular patterns, sometimes calm for minutes before suddenly shifting direction and intensity. These were precisely the conditions that separated trained shooters from truly skilled marksmen. Private Delgado, the second-to-last shooter, stepped to the line with visible nervousness. He had watched 13 Marines struggle before him, had seen the command staff's growing disappointment, and carried the weight of knowing his performance would be compared against a day of failure. His anxiety manifested immediately in his shooting. Jerky movements, rushed sequences, inadequate compensation for environmental factors. His final score barely reached the minimum passing threshold at 71%. Vieira closed her notebook briefly and looked toward Torrance. "Staff Sergeant," she said, her voice carrying across the range, "this is the most inconsistent qualification group I have evaluated in recent memory. Your training program results are concerning." Torrance's face flushed. "Ma'am, the conditions today are exceptionally challenging. These Marines have demonstrated much better performance during our training week. Combat conditions are always challenging, She replied evenly. That is precisely why we evaluate under stress. If your training program produced shooters who cannot perform when conditions are difficult, then the training program requires examination. Major Castellanos nodded in agreement, making additional notes on his clipboard. We will need to discuss this further, Staff Sergeant. But first, let us complete the qualification. Who is your final shooter? Torrance's expression showed complicated emotions as he gestured toward Station 12. Lance Corporal Kensington, sir. She transferred from an administrative unit and has been with the program for 1 week. The implication was clear. If the trained Marines had struggled, how could anyone expect better from an inexperienced transfer with minimal preparation? Torrance was already framing her anticipated failure as inevitable, protecting himself from additional criticism. Rosalind stood and gathered her rifle, her movements unhurried and deliberate. She walked to the firing line with calm confidence that somehow seemed different from the false bravado that had preceded other shooters. There was no theatrical preparation, no nervous energy, just quiet focus and complete composure. Vieira watched her approach with particular attention, her experienced eye noting details that others missed. The way Rosalind carried the rifle suggested familiarity beyond basic training. Her stance as she reached the line revealed practiced comfort rather than learned positioning. Small indicators, subtle clues that spoke of something more than the administrative clerk Torrance had dismissed. Lance Corporal Kensington, Vieira said, her tone neutral but attentive. You may begin when ready. Standard qualification protocol, all distances, all positions. Take your time and demonstrate your actual capability. The emphasis on actual capability was slight but deliberate. It was the first time all day that Vieira had added that specific phrase to her instructions, as if she suspected there was more to see than surface appearance suggested. Rosalind settled into position at the 200-yard line, her body finding the angles and balance points with unconscious precision. She did not rush through her preparation. Each movement was measured and deliberate as she established her shooting platform, adjusted the rifle, and aligned herself with the target downrange. The other Marines watched with varying expressions. Hutchins wore a smirk that anticipated vindication for his earlier mockery. Several others showed polite disinterest, already mentally preparing for the end of this disappointing qualification day. Only Okonkwo watched with genuine attention, remembering his earlier observation that she shot better than she revealed. Torrance stood with his arms crossed, his posture radiating expectation of failure. He had positioned himself where the command staff could clearly see his expression, already preparing his commentary about inexperienced transfers and the challenges of integrating administrative personnel into combat specialties. Rosalind loaded 5 rounds with smooth efficiency, her fingers handling the ammunition with practiced familiarity. She settled her cheek against the stock, her breathing falling into a natural rhythm that spoke of thousands of repetitions. The wind gusted across the range, moving the grass in visible waves, and she waited without impatience for the conditions to stabilize. The first shot broke cleanly, the suppressed recoil absorbed through proper body position, the rifle settling back on target naturally. Through the scope, the impact was visible. Dead center, exactly where she had aimed. She worked the bolt with fluid motion and prepared the second shot. 200 yards was child's play for someone with her background, but she maintained appropriate focus and respect for the fundamentals. Second shot, equally precise. Third shot, forming a tight cluster with the first two. Fourth and fifth rounds followed in smooth succession, each one placed with deliberate accuracy. When she cleared her rifle and stood to allow the range safety officer to verify her target, the grouping was immediately obvious even from the firing line. 5 rounds within a circle smaller than a fist, all clustered in the center ring. It was the tightest grouping of the entire day, achieved with a rifle that other Marines had dismissed as barely functional. Vieira's pen moved across her notebook, but her expression remained professionally neutral. Major Castellanos leaned forward slightly, his attention suddenly focused. One of the captains raised binoculars to examine the target more closely, as if doubting what he could see with naked eyes. Torrance's smirk faltered momentarily, but he recovered quickly. "Lucky shooting," he said to no one in particular. 200 yards is the easiest stage. Let us see how she handles real distance." Rosalind moved to the 400-yard line without comment. The wind had increased, creating more complex variables that required calculation and compensation. She took additional time establishing her position, reading the environmental indicators, making minute adjustments to her sight picture. Her preparation looked different now to those watching closely. What had seemed like hesitation earlier was actually methodical assessment. What appeared to be overcaution was precise attention to detail. The difference between amateur uncertainty and expert carefulness became apparent in these longer moments of preparation. She fired the 400-yard sequence with the same deliberate rhythm. 5 shots, smooth and controlled, each one compensating perfectly for wind and distance. The resulting grouping was even tighter than at 200 yards, defying the increased difficulty. Every round struck within the center scoring zone, demonstrating accuracy that exceeded basic qualification standards. Hutchins's expression had shifted from smirking to confused. He glanced at Torrance, seeking explanation for what he was witnessing. The staff sergeant's jaw was tight, his eyes narrowed as he watched Rosalind prepare for the 600-yard stage. Several Marines who had been conversing quietly fell silent, their attention drawn to the unexpected display of skill. Okonkwo allowed himself a slight smile, vindicated in his earlier assessment that she possessed abilities she had deliberately concealed. The 600-yard targets represented the point where most Marines that day had begun to struggle significantly. Environmental factors multiplied at longer ranges, requiring precise calculations and absolute control. Wind reading became critical. Trigger control had to be flawless. Any flinch or jerk would send rounds far from their intended impact point. Rosalind's preparation time increased appropriately for the distance. She studied the wind indicators, watched the grass movement at intervals along the range, calculated the required adjustments with calm focus. When she settled into her final shooting position, there was complete stillness in her body, a profound steadiness that suggested absolute control. The first shot at 600 yards struck center mass. The second followed with identical placement. By the third shot, Vieira had moved closer to observe directly, her professional interest clearly engaged. The fourth and fifth rounds completed another impossibly tight grouping that would have been impressive at any distance, but was remarkable given the challenging conditions and inferior equipment. Major Castellanos spoke quietly to his staff officers, their conversation animated despite low volume. Vieira made extensive notes, her documentation now focused entirely on Rosalind's performance. Torrance stood frozen, his carefully constructed narrative collapsing under the weight of undeniable evidence. The transition to 800 yards brought increased difficulty and higher stakes. Only 2 Marines all day had achieved passing scores at this distance, and both had done so marginally. The combination of range, wind, and pressure had proven overwhelming for shooters who seemed competent at shorter distances. Rosalind approached the 800-yard line with unchanged composure. If the increased difficulty concerned her, no outward sign revealed it. She went through her preparation ritual with the same methodical attention, taking time to ensure every element was correct before committing to the sequence. When she fired, each shot demonstrated mastery that transcended basic qualification standards. The round struck with precision that suggested professional competition experience rather than military training. Her groupings remained tight, her accuracy unwavering, her technique flawless. Hutchins no longer smirked. His face showed dawning realization that something significant was occurring, something that challenged every assumption he had made about the quiet Marine he had spent a week mocking. Other Marines exchanged glances, confusion and surprise evident in their expressions. Torrance's face had progressed through several shades of red. His confident dismissal had been proven catastrophically wrong, his judgment exposed as prejudiced and inaccurate. But the qualification was not complete. One distance remained, the longest and most challenging: 1,000 yards, where every Marine before her had struggled or failed entirely. Rosalind secured her rifle and walked toward the final firing point, her stride steady and unhurried, ready to complete what she had begun. The 1,000-yard line represented the apex of difficulty for the qualification course. At this extreme distance, bullets traveled for nearly 3 full seconds before reaching their targets. Wind could push rounds meters off course. Elevation calculations required precise understanding of ballistic trajectories. Temperature, humidity, even the rotation of the Earth became relevant factors. Only the most skilled marksmen could consistently hit targets at this range. Every single Marine who had attempted the 1,000-yard stage that day had failed to achieve even minimal standards. Hutchins had landed 1 hit out of 5 attempts. Okonkwo, despite his generally solid performance, had managed only 2 hits. Most shooters had missed completely, their rounds impacting dirt well short of the target or sailing past into the backstop beyond. Rosalind reached the firing point and set down her rifle with careful attention. She removed a small notebook from her pocket, something none of the other Marines had carried. Inside were handwritten calculations and environmental data she had been collecting throughout the morning. Wind speeds at different times, temperature fluctuations, atmosphere pressure readings. She had been preparing for this moment while watching everyone else shoot. Vieira noticed the notebook immediately. Her expression shifted subtly, recognition dawning that this Marine understood advanced ballistics at a level far beyond basic training. The gunnery sergeant moved closer, positioning herself where she could observe both Rosalind's preparation and her actual shooting technique. Major Castellanos spoke quietly to Torrance. "Staff Sergeant, what is Lance Corporal Kensington's background prior to this unit?" Torrance struggled to maintain his composure. "Sir, she transferred from an administrative position. Her personnel file indicated general infantry training, but no specialized marksmanship qualifications that I was aware of." The major's expression suggested he would be reviewing that personnel file very carefully after this qualification concluded. Captain Reeves, one of the observing officers, had his phone out and appeared to be searching military databases for additional information about the surprising shooter. Rosalind completed her calculations and returned the notebook to her pocket. She had spent nearly 5 minutes preparing for this sequence, longer than any other shooter all day. But the preparation was clearly purposeful rather than hesitant. She was gathering data, making precise calculations, ensuring every variable was accounted for before committing to the shots. She settled into prone position with movements that revealed years of practice. Her body alignment was textbook perfect, her bone support solid, her muscle relaxation complete. The rifle rested in her hands like a natural extension of her body rather than an external tool. Even with the weapon's known flaws, she had adapted her technique to compensate for its specific characteristics. The wind gusted strongly across the range, bending the tall grass in sweeping waves. She waited without impatience, her breathing steady, her focus absolute. When the wind settled into a brief period of relative stability, she took a final breath, released half of it, and pressed the trigger. The rifle recoiled. The bullet arced downrange on its long journey toward the distant target. 3 seconds passed in profound silence as everyone watched, waiting for the impact. Then, unmistakably, the target marker signaled a hit. Center mass, exactly where she had aimed. "Holy hell," one of the captains muttered, forgetting himself momentarily. Rosalind worked the bolt smoothly and prepared her second shot. The wind had shifted slightly, requiring adjustment to her hold. She compensated naturally, making minute changes to her aim point based on her reading of environmental conditions. Second shot, another center hit. The impossible was becoming routine. Hutchins stood with his mouth slightly open, all pretense of superiority completely abandoned. The Marines who had mocked her throughout the week now watched in stunned silence, witnessing skill that transcended anything they had imagined possible. Some had never seen 1,000-yard shooting this accurate, even from their instructors. Third shot, perfect impact. Fourth shot, equally precise. Each round demonstrated mastery that belonged in international competition, not a basic qualification exercise. The grouping at 1,000 yards was tighter than most Marines had achieved at 200 yards earlier that morning. Vieira's pen moved rapidly across her notebook, documenting every detail. Her professional assessment was clearly evolving beyond simple qualification scoring into recognition of exceptional talent that demanded explanation. She glanced again at the rifle Rosalind was using, mentally calculating the difficulty of achieving such precision with equipment that other Marines had deemed barely functional. Rosalind prepared her fifth and final shot. The wind gusted more strongly now, creating the most challenging conditions of the entire sequence. She waited patiently, watching the indicators, reading the environment with practiced expertise. When a moment arrived, she fired without hesitation. The final round struck center mass with the same precision as the previous four. 5 for 5 at 1,000 yards, under difficult conditions, with inferior equipment. It was a performance that would have been remarkable for an experienced sniper and was completely unprecedented for someone supposedly completing her first week of specialized training. She cleared her rifle, stood, and stepped back from the line. Her expression remained composed, neither triumphant nor smug. This was simply what she could do, what she had always been capable of doing. The revelation was for their benefit, not hers. The silence stretched for several long seconds before Vieira spoke. Lance Corporal Kensington, she said, her voice carrying authority and unmistakable respect. That was the finest shooting I have witnessed at this range in my entire career. Your performance raises obvious questions about your actual background and training. Torrance's face had gone from red to pale. His entire assessment, his week of dismissive treatment, his confident predictions had all been exposed as catastrophically wrong. Major Castellanos was staring at him with an expression that promised serious professional consequences. Before Vieira could continue her questioning, Captain Reeves looked up from his phone, his face showing surprise. "Ma'am, I found something in the database." Lance Corporal Kensington was a national junior shooting champion before she enlisted. Multiple first-place finishes in long-range precision competitions. Her father and grandfather were both Marine Corps snipers with distinguished service records. The revelation landed like an artillery shell. Every assumption, every dismissal, every mocking comment throughout the week was recontextualized in an instant. She had not been an inexperienced administrative clerk struggling to learn new skills. She had been an elite shooter deliberately restraining herself while enduring systematic harassment and sabotage. Vieira turned to face Rosalind directly. "Why did you not inform your instructors of your background when you arrived?" she asked. It was not accusatory, but genuinely curious. Rosalind met her gaze steadily. "Ma'am, in my previous units, I found that announcing credentials invited skepticism and demands for immediate proof. I preferred to let my performance speak for itself when the stakes were high enough to matter. Today was that moment." The answer was honest, professional, and devastatingly accurate. She had endured a week of abuse specifically to prove a point, to demonstrate beyond any doubt that assumptions based on appearance or background were worthless compared to actual capability. Major Castellanos closed the distance between himself and Torrance with deliberate steps, his expression transforming from surprise to carefully controlled anger. "Staff Sergeant," he said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of command authority, "you will accompany me to the command post immediately. We need to discuss your training methods and evaluation procedures in detail." The implications were unmistakable. Torrance had not simply made an error in judgment. He had created a hostile training environment, deliberately sabotaged a Marine's equipment and opportunities, and made his prejudices explicit and public. All of this had occurred under the observation of senior officers who now possessed irrefutable evidence of both his bias and his incompetence. "Yes, sir," Torrance replied, his voice stripped of its earlier confidence. He followed the major toward the vehicles, his shoulders hunched in a posture that spoke of a career suddenly in jeopardy. The other Marines watched him go, their expressions showing complicated mixtures of satisfaction, concern, and uncertainty about what would happen next. Vieira turned her attention back to Rosalind, her professional interest clearly engaged beyond the mere documentation of qualification scores. Lance Corporal, I would like to see your complete shooting records and competition history. Your performance today suggests capabilities that extend well beyond basic military training. Yes, ma'am, Rosalind replied. I have documentation of my competition placements and my family service records. My grandfather was Gunnery Sergeant Marcus Kensington, who served in Vietnam as a scout sniper. My father was Staff Sergeant Thomas Kensington, who deployed to Iraq and Afghanistan in similar roles. Vieira's expression showed recognition. I knew your grandfather by reputation. His name is still mentioned in advanced sniper courses as an example of fieldcraft excellence. You come from genuine legacy. Captain Reeves approached with his phone, still displaying database information. Ma'am, her competition record is extensive. First place in the National Junior Long Range Championship 3 consecutive years. Multiple state titles. Her scores from those competitions would have qualified her for Olympic development programs. The other Marines had gathered in a loose cluster, processing the revelations and their implications. Hutchins stood apart from the group, his face showing shame and discomfort. Throughout the week, he had led the mockery, had been loudest in his dismissal of her abilities, had taken particular pleasure in assigning her the worst equipment. Now all of that behavior was exposed as not just wrong, but absurdly, embarrassingly wrong. Okonkwo moved toward Rosalind, his approach respectful and genuine. That was incredible shooting, he said simply. I knew you were holding back, but I had no idea how much. Thank you, she replied, her tone warm toward the one Marine who had shown her basic decency throughout the week. You shot well yourself. Your fundamentals are solid. Private Chun, whose tremor had plagued his own qualification, stepped forward hesitantly. Lance Corporal, I apologize for not speaking up when the treatment you received was clearly unfair. I should have said something. Several other Marines murmured agreement, their expressions showing varying degrees of guilt and recognition. They had not all actively participated in the harassment, but neither had they opposed it. Their silence had enabled the hostile environment, and now they faced the uncomfortable reality of their own complicity. Vieira called for attention, her voice cutting through the awkward conversations. Listen up. What happened here today reveals serious problems with this training program that extend beyond one instructor's behavior. You all witnessed mistreatment of a fellow Marine, and most of you said nothing. Some of you actively participated. That failure of integrity is as concerning as the initial misconduct. The Marines stood silent, unable to dispute her assessment. She was correct. They had failed not just as shooters, but as Marines responsible for maintaining standards of professional conduct and mutual respect. However, Vieira continued, training environments exist to reveal weaknesses so they can be corrected. You have now seen that assumptions about capability based on appearance or background are worthless. You have witnessed that true skill reveals itself under pressure. And you have learned that maintaining dignity while enduring unjust treatment demonstrates character that deserves respect. She gestured toward Rosalind. Lance Corporal Kensington could have announced her credentials on day one. She could have demanded recognition based on her competition history. Instead, she chose to prove herself through performance when it mattered most. That restraint and professionalism set a standard you should all aspire to meet. The gunnery sergeant paused, letting her words settle before continuing. Moving forward, this unit will operate differently. Evaluation will be based solely on demonstrated performance. Respect will be earned through competence and professionalism, not assumed based on rank or seniority. Anyone unable to meet those standards will be removed from the program. Captain Reeves consulted with the other observing officer briefly before addressing the group. Effective immediately, qualification scores from today will be reviewed with consideration for the training environment and instruction quality. Lance Corporal Kensington's performance clearly indicates that proper training and fair treatment can produce exceptional results. We need to examine why other Marines did not receive similar support. Hutchins finally found his voice, stepping forward with visible discomfort. Ma'am, io e lance corporal Kensington a direct apology. My behavior this week was unprofessional and wrong. He turned to face Rosalind. I am sorry for the disrespect I showed you. Your performance today demonstrated character and skill that I completely failed to recognize. It was awkward, clearly difficult for him to deliver, but it appeared genuine. Rosalind acknowledged it with a simple nod. Apology accepted, Corporal. We all have opportunities to learn and improve. The response was gracious without being patronizing, acknowledging his effort while maintaining her own dignity. Several other Marines followed his example, offering their own apologies with varying degrees of eloquence and sincerity. Vieira checked her watch and made a decision. We will conclude today's qualification exercise and reconvene tomorrow morning for debriefing and program restructuring. Lance Corporal Kensington, please remain. I want to discuss your potential role in future training cycles. As the other Marines began securing equipment and preparing to depart, the atmosphere had fundamentally shifted. The hostile environment had been exposed and dismantled. The assumptions that had governed the week's interactions had been proven false. And the quiet Marine who had endured it all had demonstrated that true excellence needs no announcement, only opportunity. Rosalind remained at Station 12, securing her rifle with the same careful attention she had shown throughout the day. Vieira approached, her notebook still open, her expression showing professional respect between equals rather than superior evaluating subordinate. Your performance today was exceptional, the gunnery sergeant said. But more impressive was your discipline in restraining yourself until the moment demanded full demonstration. That level of patience and strategic thinking suggests leadership potential beyond technical shooting skills. Thank you, ma'am, Rosalind replied. My grandfather taught me that skill without character is meaningless, but character combined with skill can change everything. He taught you well, Vieira said. Tomorrow we discuss your future. I believe you have much more to offer than simply qualifying on a shooting range. The debriefing session the following morning assembled in a classroom facility adjacent to the range. All the Marines from the previous day's qualification sat in rows of chairs, their postures reflecting uncertainty about what consequences would follow. Major Castellanos stood at the front alongside Vieira and Captain Reeves, their combined presence signaling the seriousness of the proceedings. Staff Sergeant Torrance was notably absent. His empty chair at the instructor's desk spoke volumes about decisions made overnight regarding his future with the training program. The Marines exchanged glances, understanding without official announcement that their former instructor would not be returning. Major Castellanos began without preamble. Yesterday's qualification exercise revealed multiple systemic failures in this training program. Poor instruction, hostile environment, equipment sabotage, and widespread acceptance of unprofessional conduct. These failures are unacceptable and will be addressed comprehensively. He gestured to Captain Reeves, who distributed packets containing updated training schedules and policy documents. You will notice significant changes to program structure, instructor assignments, and evaluation procedures. These changes take effect immediately and are non-negotiable. Vieira stepped forward, assuming command of the briefing with natural authority. First, let me address qualification scores from yesterday. Given the documented training deficiencies and deliberate equipment tampering, all scores will be reviewed individually. Marines who demonstrated effort and basic competency despite inadequate instruction will receive opportunities for requalification under proper conditions. Relief was visible on several faces. The prospect of failing out of the program due to poor instruction had weighed heavily overnight. Hutchins sat with his hands folded, his earlier arrogance completely absent. However, Vieira continued, requalification is not automatic. It requires demonstrated commitment to professional standards and willingness to train under proper leadership without the toxic attitudes that characterized the previous cycle. Anyone unable or unwilling to meet those expectations can request transfer to other units. She paused, making eye contact with multiple Marines to ensure her message was clearly received. Second, this unit will have new leadership structure. Staff Sergeant Torrance has been reassigned pending investigation into his conduct. Temporary instructors will arrive from other training facilities while permanent replacements are identified. Captain Reeves added context. The investigation extends beyond this immediate unit. Staff Sergeant Torrance's previous training cycles will be examined to identify patterns of misconduct and determine if other Marines were similarly mistreated. This is not isolated discipline. This is comprehensive program reform. Vieira's expression softened slightly as she addressed the next topic. On a more positive note, yesterday also revealed exceptional talent that should be recognized and utilized properly. Lance Corporal Kensington demonstrated not only superior technical skill, but also remarkable professionalism under sustained pressure and mistreatment. All eyes turned toward Rosalind, who sat in the back row with characteristic composure. She met their gazes calmly, neither proud nor uncomfortable with the attention. After consultation with command staff, Vieira continued, "I am pleased to announce that Lance Corporal Kensington has been offered a position as assistant instructor for the next training cycle. She has accepted and will begin those duties following completion of formal instructor qualification courses." The announcement generated immediate reaction. Some Marines showed genuine approval, nodding and offering quiet congratulations. Others appeared surprised, but accepting. A few seemed uncomfortable, perhaps recognizing that the Marine they had mocked would now be evaluating and instructing their peers. Okonkwo raised his hand and was acknowledged. "Ma'am, will Lance Corporal Kensington also be completing advanced sniper training, or will she focus exclusively on instruction?" "Excellent question," Vieira replied. "She'll be doing both. Her competition background and family legacy position her well for the most advanced courses, and her teaching abilities will benefit other Marines throughout her career. The Marine Corps needs shooters who can both perform and instruct at the highest levels." Rosalind spoke for the first time that morning. "Ma'am, I appreciate the confidence and the opportunity. I look forward to helping other Marines develop their skills properly." Her tone was professional and genuine, without any hint of superiority or vindictiveness toward those who had treated her poorly. The graciousness of her response stood in sharp contrast to the week of harassment she had endured. Hutchins raised his hand slowly. "Ma'am, permission to speak freely." "Granted, Corporal." He stood, facing the room rather than just addressing the instructors. "I want to publicly acknowledge that my conduct last week was completely unacceptable. I allowed personal biases to override professional judgment, and I contributed to an environment that violated Marine Corps values. Lance Corporal Kensington deserves respect, not just for her shooting ability, but for maintaining dignity while facing treatment that should never have occurred." He turned specifically toward Rosalind. "I meant what I said yesterday. I am genuinely sorry, and I hope to learn from your example moving forward. If you are willing, I would appreciate any instruction or guidance you can provide." The apology was more articulate and thoughtful than his previous attempt, suggesting he had spent considerable time reflecting overnight. Rosalind acknowledged it with a nod that conveyed acceptance without requiring verbal response. Major Castellanos resumed control of the briefing. "Let me be absolutely clear about expectations going forward. This unit will operate with zero tolerance for discrimination, harassment, or unprofessional conduct of any kind. Your fellow Marines deserve to be evaluated on performance and character, nothing else. Anyone who cannot meet that standard will be removed immediately." He looked around the room, ensuring every Marine understood the seriousness of his statement. "The Marine Corps is stronger when we recognize and develop talent wherever it exists, regardless of background, gender, or any other factor irrelevant to combat effectiveness." Yesterday proved that point definitively. Captain Reeves distributed additional paperwork. "You each have assignments for remedial training and professional development. Some of you will re-qualify within 2 weeks. Others will require extended instruction to address fundamental deficiencies. Your individual training plans are detailed in these packets. Vieira added final instructions. Training resumes tomorrow with temporary instructors who specialize in rebuilding programs after leadership failures. They are experienced, professional, and completely intolerant of the behaviors that characterized last week. I suggest you arrive prepared to work hard and maintain impeccable conduct. The briefing concluded with administrative details and dismissal instructions. As Marines filed out of the classroom, several approached Rosalind directly. Private Chun asked specific questions about wind reading techniques. Corporal Matthews requested guidance on trigger control. Even Marines who had not directly harassed or sought to benefit from her expertise, recognizing opportunity where they had previously seen only someone to dismiss. Okonkwo waited until others had dispersed before approaching. "That was well handled," he said quietly. "You could have been vindictive after everything that happened. Instead, you are choosing to help people improve." Rosalind smiled slightly. "My grandfather used to say that proving people wrong is satisfying, but helping them become better is meaningful. I prefer meaningful." The transformation was complete. In less than 24 hours, the hostile environment had been dismantled, leadership had been replaced, and the Marine who had been systematically undermined was now positioned to shape the program's future. Not through anger or revenge, but through demonstrated excellence and genuine commitment to helping others succeed. As she walked back toward the barracks, Rosalind thought about the photograph in her footlocker. Her grandfather's image in dress blues, his marksmanship badges gleaming. She had honored his legacy not by announcing it, but by living it. And now she would help others understand what he had taught her. That skill combined with character could change everything. 2 weeks after the qualification debacle, the range had transformed into a fundamentally different training environment. The temporary instructors who arrived brought decades of combined experience and zero patience for the behaviors that had characterized the previous cycle. Master Sergeant Kovacs, a grizzled veteran with 3 combat deployments and a reputation for brutal honesty tempered by genuine care for his Marines, led the restructure program. Rosalind had completed her instructor qualification courses with predictable excellence, earning top scores and glowing evaluations from the cadre who assessed her teaching methods. Now she worked alongside Kovacs and the other temporary staff, helping rebuild a program that had nearly been destroyed by prejudice and incompetence. The requalification exercises began on a morning that promised better weather than the previous attempt. Clear skies, moderate temperatures, and consistent wind patterns created conditions that would allow Marines to demonstrate their actual capabilities without environmental factors overwhelming their skills. Hutchins approached the firing line first, having requested the earliest slot to prove his commitment to improvement. Over the past 2 weeks, he had sought Rosalind's guidance repeatedly, asking detailed questions about technique, accepting criticism without defensiveness, and demonstrating genuine humility. His transformation from arrogant antagonist to dedicated student had been remarkable to witness. As he prepared for his 200-yard sequence, Rosalind positioned herself behind him in an instructional capacity. "Remember what we worked on," she said quietly. "Consistent breathing rhythm, smooth trigger press, follow-through on every shot. Do not rush between rounds." "Roger that," he replied, settling into position with noticeably improved form. His preparation was more methodical now, less theatrical. When he fired, his grouping showed marked improvement from his previous attempt. 4 solid hits in the center zones, 1 slightly wide, but still scoring. Not perfect, but competent and respectable. "Good work, Corporal," Kovacs called from his observation position. "That is what proper preparation looks like. Continue that discipline through the remaining stages." Hutchins moved through the qualification with steady performance. His scores at longer distances reflected genuine skill development rather than lucky shooting. By the time he completed the course, his overall accuracy had improved by 23 percentage points. He had earned his qualification legitimately, through hard work and proper instruction. Private Chun followed with similar improvement. The tremor that had plagued his previous attempt had been addressed through relaxation techniques and breathing exercises that Rosalind had taught him. His confidence had grown proportionally to his developing competence, creating a positive cycle of improvement. One after another, the Marines who had struggled during the first qualification now demonstrated what they could achieve under proper training conditions. Equipment functioned correctly. Instruction was professional and supportive. Environmental factors were explained rather than used as excuses. The results spoke clearly about the impact of leadership and training quality. Okonkwo shot with his characteristic solid fundamentals, his scores improving even from his previous respectable performance. When he completed his sequence, Kovacs nodded approvingly. Outstanding work, Private. You have the consistency that defines professional marksmen. Keep developing that foundation. Thank you, Master Sergeant, Okonkwo replied. He glanced at Rosalind as he secured his weapon. The instruction these past 2 weeks made all the difference. By midday, every Marine who had requested requalification had completed the course. The score improvements were dramatic and consistent, proving definitively that the previous failures resulted from training program deficiencies rather than individual inadequacy. Major Castellanos, who had returned to observe the requalification, made extensive notes about the contrast between the two exercises. As the official qualification concluded, Kovacs called for the unit to assemble. Over the past 2 weeks, I have had the privilege of working with Marines who faced significant obstacles in their initial training. What I witnessed was not lack of potential, but lack of proper leadership and instruction. Today, you demonstrated what happens when those deficiencies are corrected. He gestured toward the target results posted on the board behind him. These scores represent real capability developed through professional training. You should be proud of your improvement, but understand that this is merely the foundation. True expertise requires continued dedication and practice. Rosalind stood slightly behind Kovacs, her role as assistant instructor now clearly established and accepted by the unit. Several Marines had privately expressed appreciation for her teaching methods, noting that she combined technical expertise with genuine patience and encouragement. Major Castellanos stepped forward to address the group. The transformation of this unit over 2 weeks has been remarkable and serves as a case study in the importance of leadership quality. Master Sergeant Kovacs and his team, including Lance Corporal Kensington, have demonstrated what professional instruction should look like. He paused, his expression becoming more serious. The investigation into Staff Sergeant Torrance's conduct is ongoing. His behavior violated multiple regulations and Marine Corps values. He will face appropriate consequences, and his previous training cycles are being reviewed to identify other Marines who may have been similarly mistreated. The Major's words confirmed what most had suspected. Torrance's career was effectively over, his prejudices and misconduct having finally caught up with him. Several Marines exchanged satisfied glances, feeling that justice was being served. Looking forward, Castellanos continued, this unit will receive permanent leadership within the next month. Until then, Master Sergeant Kovacs will continue as acting chief instructor. Lance Corporal Kensington will remain as assistant instructor, and I am pleased to announce her promotion to corporal will be effective next week. The announcement generated immediate reaction. Applause broke out spontaneously, led by Okonkwo and quickly joined by others. Even Hutchins clapped enthusiastically, his earlier resentment completely replaced by genuine respect and appreciation. Rosalind accepted the recognition with characteristic grace, nodding in acknowledgement without excessive pride. The promotion was earned, merited by both her technical expertise and her teaching effectiveness. More importantly, it positioned her to have greater impact on future training cycles and program development. Kovacs dismissed the formation, but requested that Rosalind remain for consultation. As the other Marines dispersed, discussing their improved scores and celebrating their success, he pulled her aside for private conversation. Corporal Select Kensington, he said with a slight smile at the about-to-be official rank, I've been doing this job for 23 years. I have trained hundreds of Marines, worked with dozens of instructors, and evaluated countless shooting techniques. What you demonstrated during the original qualification was exceptional. What you have shown over these past 2 weeks as an instructor is equally impressive. Thank you, Master Sergeant, she replied. I have tried to teach the way my grandfather taught me, with patience and genuine investment in student success. Your grandfather would be proud, Kovacs said seriously. Not just of your shooting ability, but of your character and professionalism. The way you handled mistreatment, then turned that experience into motivation to help others, that demonstrates leadership maturity beyond your rank and years. He handed her a folder containing paperwork. I have recommended you for advanced instructor courses and eventual assignment to the Marine Corps Scout Sniper School as permanent cadre. Your combination of competitive shooting background, family legacy, and proven teaching ability makes you ideal for shaping the next generation of Marine snipers. Rosalind opened the folder, scanning the recommendations and course assignments. It represented a career path she had hoped for, but had not dared to expect so quickly. The opportunity to influence sniper training at the institutional level, to ensure other Marines received proper instruction and fair treatment, aligned perfectly with her goals. I accept with gratitude, Master Sergeant, she said. I look forward to continuing this work and honoring the legacy my family built. Good, Kovacs replied. Now go celebrate with your students. They earned their success today, and you earned the satisfaction of seeing them achieve it. The promotion ceremony took place on the range, where everything had changed. The entire training unit assembled in formation, their uniforms crisp in the morning sunlight. Major Castellanos conducted the ceremony personally, recognizing the symbolic importance of promoting the Marine who had exposed systemic failures and helped rebuild the program. Corporal Rosalind Kensington, he announced formally, reading from the promotion warrant, you are hereby promoted to the rank of corporal in the United States Marine Corps, effective this date. Your demonstrated technical expertise, instructional capability, and exemplary character embody the leadership qualities we seek to develop in all Marines. He removed her Lance Corporal chevrons and replaced them with corporal insignia, the additional stripe representing not just rank advancement, but recognition of her contribution to the unit's transformation. She saluted sharply, and he returned it with equal precision. The formation applauded as she returned to her position. Okonkwo stood next to her in the ranks, his expression showing genuine pleasure at seeing her recognized. Hutchins, positioned several Marines down, clapped with enthusiasm that would have seemed impossible 3 weeks earlier. Following the ceremony, Kovacs announced an informal gathering at the equipment shed where refreshments had been arranged. The atmosphere shifted from military formality to collegial celebration as Marines congratulated Rosalind and discussed the dramatic changes that had reshaped their training experience. Private Chun approached with a shy smile. Corporal Kensington, I wanted to thank you specifically for the breathing exercises you taught me. My shooting has improved, but more importantly, my confidence has grown. I actually believe I can succeed in this program now. You always had the capability, Rosalind replied warmly. You just needed proper instruction and fair opportunity. Keep building on that foundation, and you will do well. Corporal Matthews joined the conversation, asking technical questions about advanced ballistics calculations. Several other Marines gathered around, creating an informal teaching moment that illustrated how completely the unit dynamics had transformed. Where 3 weeks ago she had been isolated and mocked, she was now sought after for guidance and respected for her expertise. Hutchins waited until the immediate crowd dispersed before approaching. He carried a small package wrapped in plain paper. Corporal Kensington, he said formally, then corrected himself with a slight smile. Rosalind, if I may, I wanted to give you something. He handed her the package. Inside was a photograph, clearly decades old, showing 2 Marines in combat gear. She recognized her grandfather immediately from his distinctive features. The second Marine bore a strong resemblance to Hutchins, though clearly from an earlier generation. That is my grandfather, Hutchins explained quietly. Gunnery Sergeant William Hutchins. He served in Vietnam in the same sniper unit as your grandfather. I found this photograph in my family archives after learning about your background. They apparently worked together on several operations. Rosalind studied the image with genuine interest, seeing the connection between their families that neither had known existed. Her grandfather had rarely spoken about specific individuals from his service, but the camaraderie evident in the photograph spoke volumes. "This is remarkable," she said. "Thank you for sharing it. I had no idea our families had that connection." "Neither did I," Hutchins admitted, "which makes my initial behavior even more shameful. I dishonored not just you, but the legacy our grandfathers built together." His voice carried genuine remorse. "I hope that going forward, I can honor their partnership by treating you with the respect they clearly showed each other." The gesture was thoughtful and meaningful, representing growth that extended beyond mere apology into genuine understanding. Rosalind accepted it with appreciation, recognizing the significance of his effort to make amends through shared history rather than empty words. Okonkwo joined them, looking at the photograph with interest. "That is powerful," he said. "History connecting in unexpected ways." He turned to Rosalind. "So what happens next for you, Corporal? When do you start the advanced instructor courses?" "Next month," she replied. 3 weeks of intensive training at Quantico, then assignment to the Scout Sniper School for a 6-month rotation before permanent placement is determined. Master Sergeant Kovacs thinks I might eventually be assigned to curriculum development, helping redesign training programs across the Marine Corps. "That is well-deserved," Okonkwo said. "You have proven you can both perform and teach at the highest levels. The Marines who train under you in the future will benefit enormously." Major Castellanos approached the group, his presence drawing immediate attention. "Corporal Kensington, I wanted to inform you that the investigation into Staff Sergeant Torrance has concluded. He has been formally reprimanded, removed from all training duties, and will be reassigned to a non-instructional position for the remainder of his service. Additionally, 3 of his previous students have come forward describing similar patterns of harassment and bias." The Major's expression showed satisfaction that justice had been served. "Your decision to endure the treatment rather than complain immediately actually helped our investigation. It provided clear documentation of systematic misconduct rather than isolated incidents. While I would never recommend that approach normally, in this case it led to comprehensive reform." Rosalind nodded understanding. "Sir, I appreciate the thorough investigation. My hope is that future Marines will not face similar treatment, because proper oversight and accountability will prevent it." "That is precisely our goal," Castellanos replied. "Your experience, as difficult as it was, has already generated policy changes that will affect training programs throughout the Marine Corps. You have made a significant impact beyond just this unit." As the afternoon progressed, the gathering evolved into genuine camaraderie. Marines shared stories, discussed training experiences, and planned for upcoming qualifications and deployments. The toxic environment that had characterized the unit 3 weeks earlier had been completely replaced by professional respect and mutual support. Kovacs called for attention one final time before dismissing the informal gathering. "I want to leave you with a thought," he said, his voice carrying across the assembled Marines. 3 weeks ago, this unit was failing. Not because you lacked potential, but because leadership failed you. One Marine endured systematic mistreatment, maintained her professionalism, and ultimately demonstrated excellence that exposed those failures. He gestured toward Rosalind. Corporal Kensington could have complained, could have demanded recognition, could have allowed the treatment to diminish her performance. Instead, she chose to prove herself when it mattered most, then chose to help you all improve rather than holding grudges. That is the definition of leadership and character we should all aspire to demonstrate. The Marines responded with applause that felt genuine and earned. Rosalind accepted it with quiet dignity, understanding that this moment represented not just personal recognition, but validation of principles her grandfather had taught her about honor, patience, and the power of excellence combined with character. As the gathering dispersed and Marines returned to their duties, Rosalind walked back toward the barracks with Okonkwo. The range stretched behind them, the targets standing silent witness to everything that had transpired over the past weeks. Your grandfather would be proud, Okonkwo said simply, not just of your shooting, but of how you handled everything with dignity. She thought about the photograph in her footlocker, about the legacy she carried, about the opportunity now before her to shape how future Marines would be trained and treated. I hope so, she replied. That was always the goal, to honor what he taught me, and to ensure others receive the fair treatment and proper instruction that every Marine deserves. 6 months later, Corporal Rosalind Kensington stood on a different range at a different facility, but the fundamental mission remained unchanged. The Marine Corps Scout Sniper School stretched across a vast training area in the mountains, where aspiring snipers learned the most advanced skills the Corps could teach. She had completed her instructor courses with distinction and now stood before a new class of students as their primary marksmanship instructor. The Marines assembled before her represented the next generation, carefully selected candidates who had already proven themselves in initial qualifications. Among them were two faces she recognized immediately. Private First Class Okonkwo, who had continued his development and earned his place in this prestigious program, and Sergeant Hutchins, who had worked tirelessly to overcome his past failures and secure assignment to advanced training. Both men met her eyes with respect and recognition, understanding that their shared history had brought them to this moment. The journey from that difficult week on the North Carolina range to this advanced training environment had transformed all of them in different ways. "Good morning," she began, her voice carrying authority earned through demonstrated excellence rather than merely granted by rank. "Welcome to Scout Sniper School. Over the next 12 weeks, you will be challenged physically, mentally, and emotionally. Some of you will succeed, others will not. The difference will be determined by your dedication, your integrity, and your willingness to accept instruction and continuously improve." She paused, letting her words settle. "I will not ask anything of you that I have not done myself. I will evaluate your performance fairly and honestly. I will provide you with the best instruction I am capable of delivering. What you do with that opportunity is entirely up to you." Master Sergeant Kovacs stood at the back of the training area, observing her instruction with approval. He had recommended her for this position specifically because she understood not just the technical aspects of shooting, but the importance of fair treatment and professional development. The Marine Corps needed instructors who could both demonstrate excellence and inspire it in others. Over the following weeks, Rosalind's teaching methods proved as effective as her shooting ability. She combined technical precision with patient explanation, challenging students while supporting their development. When Marines struggled, she identified specific areas for improvement rather than dismissing their potential. When they succeeded, she acknowledged their progress while pushing them toward even higher standards. Okonkwo excelled under her instruction, his solid fundamentals providing a strong foundation for advanced techniques. She watched him develop from competent shooter to exceptional marksman, his confidence growing proportionally to his expanding capabilities. During a particularly challenging long-range exercise, he achieved a grouping that rivaled her own performance, earning recognition from the entire cadre. Hutchins's journey was more complicated. He arrived carrying the weight of his past behavior and the determination to prove he had genuinely changed. Rosalind treated him exactly as she treated every other student, with professional respect and fair evaluation. She neither held grudges nor offered special consideration, understanding that equality meant evaluating performance without bias in either direction. During a night navigation exercise, Hutchins became disoriented and fell significantly behind schedule. Rather than allowing him to fail without intervention, Rosalind spent additional time working with him on land navigation techniques, ensuring he understood the skills rather than simply punishing his mistake. The investment paid dividends as he subsequently excelled in navigation exercises and helped other students who struggled with similar challenges. The transformation in Hutchins was complete and genuine. He had evolved from arrogant antagonist to humble professional, understanding that true strength came from admitting weaknesses and working to overcome them. His relationship with Rosalind had become one of mutual professional respect, built on shared commitment to excellence rather than complicated by past conflict. As graduation approached, Major Castellanos arrived to observe final evaluations and deliver the commencement address. He recognized Rosalind immediately, his expression showing satisfaction at seeing how far she had progressed in such a short time. "Corporal Kensington," he said during a break between exercises, "I have been following your career with interest. The reports from your cadre here are exceptional. You have become exactly the kind of instructor the Marine Corps needs, someone who combines technical mastery with genuine dedication to student development." "Thank you, sir," she replied. "I have tried to honor the legacy my grandfather built and ensure that every Marine receives the fair treatment and quality instruction they deserve." "You have succeeded admirably," he said. "I also wanted to inform you that the policy changes implemented after your original qualification experience have been adopted across multiple training commands. Your experience, difficult as it was, has improved how thousands of Marines will be trained in the future." The validation was meaningful, confirming that enduring the mistreatment had served a purpose beyond personal vindication. Systematic reform had emerged from documented misconduct, and future Marines would benefit from improved oversight and accountability. Graduation day arrived with clear skies and a crisp mountain air that made the facility ideal for precision shooting. The students assembled in formation, their uniforms bearing the distinctive Scout sniper insignia they had earned through 12 weeks of intensive training. Okonkwo and Hutchins stood among their peers, both having successfully completed the demanding program. Rosalind participated in the ceremony as an instructor, helping present certificates and congratulating graduates on their achievement. When she shook Okonkwo's hand, he smiled genuinely. "Thank you, Corporal. Your instruction made all the difference. You taught me not just how to shoot, but how to think like a professional marksman." "You did the work yourself," she replied. "I simply provided guidance. Your success belongs to you." Hutchins approached more hesitantly, still carrying some residual discomfort from their shared history. "Corporal Kensington," he said formally, "I want you to know that training under your instruction has been one of the most important experiences of my Marine Corps career. You could have made it difficult for me, but instead you treated me fairly and helped me become better. I will carry that lesson forward in my own leadership." "That means a great deal," she said sincerely. "We all have opportunities to grow and change. You seized that opportunity, and you should be proud of who you have become." If you enjoyed this story and connected with Rosalind's journey, drop a comment about your favorite moment or character. Maybe you have witnessed someone prove doubters wrong through pure skill and determination, or perhaps you have been that person yourself. Share your story with us, because these experiences of overcoming underestimation and demonstrating hidden strength happen everywhere, and they deserve to be celebrated. As the ceremony concluded and graduates dispersed to their next assignments, Rosalind returned to her quarters to pack for her own upcoming transfer. She had been selected for assignment to the Marine Corps Training Development Division, where she would help design curriculum and establish standards for sniper programs across the Corps. She opened her footlocker and removed the photograph of her grandfather in his dress blues, his marksmanship badges gleaming. Next to it, she placed the photograph Hutchins had given her, showing their grandfathers together in Vietnam. 2 generations, 2 families, connected by service and commitment to excellence. Her phone showed a message from her father, a brief text that carried enormous weight. "Your grandfather would be incredibly proud. You honored his legacy not by announcing it, but by living it every day. Love you, kiddo." She smiled, feeling the connection across generations. The legacy was not just about shooting ability or military service. It was about character, integrity, and the commitment to treat others with fairness and respect while maintaining the highest standards of excellence. Master Sergeant Kovacs knocked on her doorframe. "Ready for your next adventure, Corporal?" "Yes, Master Sergeant," she replied, securing her gear. "Ready to help ensure every Marine receives the training and treatment they deserve." "Outstanding," he said. "The Marine Corps is better because of what you endured and how you responded to it. Never forget that your character mattered as much as your skill. As she walked toward the vehicle that would transport her to her next assignment, Rosalind looked back at the range one final time. The mountains rose in the distance, eternal and unchanging. But the Marines who trained here would be different now, shaped by improved programs and fairer treatment. Benefiting from reforms that emerged from one Marine's decision to endure injustice and respond with excellence rather than bitterness. The legacy continued, not just in her own career, but in every Marine who would train under better conditions because she had the courage to prove that assumptions based on appearance meant nothing compared to demonstrated capability. Her grandfather had taught her that skill without character was meaningless, but character combined with skill could change everything. She had proven him right, and now she would spend her career ensuring that lesson reached as many Marines as possible, one training program at a time.